the first group of tools are ones to help you manage your tasks and your time. So there's a few here that we're suggesting you have a look at. So there are two task management tools that are very similar. One is Todoist and the other is Microsoft To Do. Very, very similar in name and very similar actually in functionality. I'll move on and show you a screenshot in a moment, but essentially you can add tasks. It's a little bit, it's a bit of a replica for listing tasks in your notebook or having them in your head. You add them into the tool. Like with many of these tools, there are mobile apps available as well. So you can be, and they'll sync. So you could have these on your desktop or a laptop and be kind of adding tasks as they come up. And you could pick those up and add or tick off things you've done on your mobile phone as well if you download the app. Toggle Track is one that's slightly different. It allows you to track time. So let's say you're working on a number of different projects but you've got one day, you're funded one day to work on this thing and 2 days to work on something else, and you're having to spread time across the week, and it might be just that you're wanting to double check you're spending the right time, or it might be that you're doing some kind of consultancy and there's a limited budget, and it's important that you're not spending more time. So Toggle allows you to switch on a clock essentially whilst you're working on a specific thing, and then it kind of tracks that time. If I come on to this screenshot, so rather than jump out to all of the tools, what I've done for you on these slides is a number of screenshots, so I'll talk them through and you'll get an idea of how some of the tools work. So this is my To-Do. I use it not every day, but every now and again when I feel lots of tasks mounting up, maybe before I'm going on leave. Here we go, that's what this one is. Just kind of get them down there so that I don't forget things. And you can use it at a very simple level. And then tick off as and when you've done things, and there's a nice satisfying noise that sounds as you tick something off. But it does, you are able to also share your to-do list and allocate between a number of you as well. So you can use this at a very simple level just for your own tasks, but there is some more functionality. The other thing that's relatively new is that it does integrate with Outlook. So if you've got, you can pull up your list of to-do tasks within your Outlook window if you're using Microsoft or Office 365 for your email. So it's very easy. You'd literally click on add a task, list them, and then cross them off as and when you've done them. So those are just some basic kind of task management tools that work really well for you as an individual. We'll come on a little bit later to some similar tools that enable you to kind of schedule tasks and work as a team. But the next set of tools that we'll look at is scheduling meetings. So somebody mentioned that they're already using Doodle. I noticed also that email was a popular choice in that Mentimeter that we did, and in the group discussion that I joined earlier, email was what the two attendees identified as the one tool that they can't do without. But sometimes email is a bit frustrating, and particularly if your role is to schedule a meeting with a group of people. I'm sure you've been there where you've sent out an email and asked lots of people for their availability, and then you're trolling through your emails to find people's responses, maybe jotting things down on a piece of paper and kind of trying to work out which date most people can do. So some of the tools we'll look at today kind of almost take things out of email to make it more manageable for you, and Doodle is very definitely one of those tools. And I've got a screenshot we'll have a look in a moment. There are some other tools. Calendly is one that I see quite a lot of people using. I've even seen it in people's signatures, and that's a tool where essentially you link it with your own calendar, so you can you can say to people, book an appointment with me. They click on that link and then they see where there are free slots. So you're almost removing yourself from having to arrange that meeting, because you're able to share the times that you're free, and somebody can pick what fits their own availability. And the green icon there is booking. Sometimes it doesn't help with some of these tool icons if they don't have the name of the tool next to it. But as I said, there's links in all of these slides. Bookings is an Office 365 app. And again, I've got a screenshot for each of these just to explain a little bit more. So this is what Doodle looks like. There's a free version. So basically you go to the Doodle site, you can use it without setting up an account, and you put in dates and times. That could be kind of AM, PM, or it could be specific times that you're wanting to find out people's availability for a meeting. And then you get a link that you can share. So you can go back then to your email group, and instead of asking people to get back to you via email, you're asking them to click on a link and then to share their availability. So this is what it might then look like, and you can see that it's very easy then to see April the 21st morning or afternoon. Everybody that has responded can make either of those days, so it's a quick way to decide on the best date for a meeting. You can also upgrade your Doodle account. So this scenario is for a partnership meeting, so I know everybody that I've invited to click on the link, but it might be that you've got a wider group of people and you're asking them to fill in the link, and actually just having their name isn't necessarily going to identify them to you. So you can upgrade to a package where when they click on, when they add their name and tick off their availability, that they're also asked for their email address or other contact details. So Doodle's a good tool to use at a simple level and in the basic free package. But there are some other options that you can upgrade to for giving you extra functionality, and there is a charity discount. Just on the left-hand side, there's some other, as well as just ticking off to see whether see what people's availabilities are. You can limit the number of votes per option. So you might want people just to pick the 2 best days for them. So you can kind of limit. You can also make it a hidden poll. So if it's not appropriate for other people to see dates that they've ticked off, as well as using it for dates, you can use it for polls as well. So you can ask people to vote on other things, and that might be where it's a bit more, you might consider it's more appropriate for that to be a hidden poll. So you see what people have chosen, but they don't see what each other has chosen. So again, when you get these slides, you can click on them and you'll link through to further information for Doodle. But there are lots of similar tools, and I think I'll be repeating that line throughout this morning. So we have kind of picked one that we're familiar with and one that we know there's a kind of free option to get started with. This is a screenshot of the Bookings app. So this is where you can link calendars again. So I forgot that we played around with this a couple of years ago, but I obviously linked Sorrel and my calendar to the Bookings app, and it means that we then get a link to a kind of publicly available web page, and we could share that with people and say, book your own slot for a digital one-to-one surgery. And you can set the time for those slots, and you can set buffer times in between if you want to have 15 minutes break before the next one's booked. And I'm going to quickly just go to the web page and just show that to you how it works. So this is the live web page. As you can see, Sorrel and I both chock-a-block today. There's no way anybody can book in a one-to-one. There's a little drop down here, so this is where you can see that I've linked it to our calendars. I think you could probably override what's shown there if you don't want somebody's name. But if I click tomorrow, if I click on myself, I have got no slots tomorrow, but if I click on Sorrel, these times are showing up in her calendar as not having something booked in. So you could then go and book a session and kind of follow through. So yeah, it's just another nice way to kind of open up your calendar and cut out some of those emails that otherwise would have been going backwards and forwards. So these tools you link behind the scenes with your calendar, and that will work in this instance for Office 365 if you're an Office 365 user. But the next tool, Calendly, this will link with any of the major calendars that you might use. So if you're using a Google Calendar, you could use this Calendly tool to set up a kind of similar self-serve appointment booking system. So yeah, this was the example recently where I'd got back to somebody and they said yeah, that's great, let's have a meeting, book in a meeting with me, here's the link to my calendar. They were using that tool, and when I clicked on the link, I had this option to go for a 30-minute option or a 50-minute option, and then I could go through and choose a date that worked with my calendar. We'll share a slide a bit later with links to lists of tools if you want to kind of go to some other sources and find some other tools. And one of the resources there is something called the Catalyst service recipes. So this is a collection of examples of how organizations have used various tools to meet various challenges. So I spotted there's a nice what's called a service recipe there that talks through how an organization had a challenge around appointment bookings, and I think this was with during lockdown and kind of moving stuff digitally, and they started using Calendly. So there's a lot of learning that you can take from there in terms of that organization's experience. This might or might not be relevant. It's kind of the next step on from those tools that help people show their availability, choose the best date, or kind of open up your calendar for people to book their own slots. If you're if the service that you're running involves kind of needing people on a shift or a rota, there are a couple of tools there that you could click on and find out some more. So on the left, this is shifts. So this is if you're using my Office 365, and then Rota Cloud is another third-party tool you could look at. I know some organizations were beginning to think about how they're going to manage coming back to the office and having only a certain number of people in the office in one go. You could probably look at using a shared calendar, but depending on how complicated that looked, you could also probably look at one of these tools. Okay, so we had a look at the beginning at some kind of personal task and time management tools. These next three work really well in a kind of group or team setting. So this is where you're needing to kind of manage projects and tasks across a number of you within that could be within an organization, or equally it could be working externally with other partners as well. So Trello is a third-party tool which we used to use quite a bit. Planner is part of the Office 365 suite of tools, and we've started to use that now. And Asana is another option for you to have a look at. Again, I've got some screenshots just to give you an idea. All of these will have a number of views that you can switch between. So most of them have a kind of list view of tasks, which would be very similar to the to-do screenshot that I showed you. But they all also have some kind of a board view. And this is based on Kanban. So it's a kind of it's a methodology where you visualize tasks that are needed to be done for a process, and you can allocate to different people, and you can keep track of where you are in terms of completing that overall task, because you break it down into smaller ones. This example here, we've got a number of boards that we've actually kind of renamed in a standard Kanban setup. You would have a kind of to-do list, and then you would have an in progress list, and then you would have a done. Essentially, you're kind of moving things through. But in this example, we use this tool when we were managing a big website development project. And again, the idea was a space that we could collaborate with the organization we were working with, but also a way for us to take a lot of the communication off email and to stop having various documents and attached and sent backwards and forwards. Instead, we would have conversations and kind of map out what was needed to be done on this Trello board. So again, you can use Trello for free, and you would go and kind of set up according to how it fits your project, and then you would invite other people onto the board so that they could contribute and collaborate there. So you can see we've broken this up. We've got kind of the brief and project management in this column, and then we've got graphics and images here. So the idea was that we wouldn't be sending images backwards and forwards and email. Any images for the website would be uploaded onto this board, and then everybody could access them. Quickly going to show you another example of Trello. It's a nice example from a meeting that I was in. I think we're all getting a bit better at these online meetings. It's a bit of a learning curve, but I was in what I thought was a really productive meeting earlier last week, actually, with the local authority. And we were looking at what's called digital join up. But during the meeting, we have the agenda on the left-hand side. Everybody was contributing by typing in. So each of these columns, it allows you to add the terminology in Trello is card. So you could add cards and then type in your contribution. So we kind of worked from left to right as part of the agenda, and it was really clear, and it gave a chance for everybody to contribute, and there's a record of the meeting there and then. Somebody wasn't having to type up minutes. I think at the end there's even actions, next steps and actions. So everything to do with that meeting was captured on this board. Yeah, I definitely saw action, next steps, I think. So yeah, that's another example of when you could use one of these tools actually just to help you have a really productive meeting and enable people to join in. This is what Asana looks like. So some of these tools are very similar. We're going to have a little chat later on about what factors might determine why you would use one tool and not the other. And sometimes there's not really, too much difference between the tools. There might be other factors that would lead you to one rather than the other. But this is just showing, again, something we used a good few years ago now, really just to test it and see how it worked for us as an organization. Again, you can download this as an app, but this is just the view, the list view of tasks really. And at the top, you can see there's a board tab. So you could then switch that into a board and it would look very similar to Trello. And you can, if you're setting deadlines for tasks, you can also switch to a calendar view. So it gives you a lot of flexibility there in terms of how those visuals work for you, and really helps with a lot of project management. There's a lot of functionality there. If you've got kind of deadlines and you need people to complete things, you can allocate tasks through these tools. So what we're tending to use for a similar scenario at the moment is Planner. And as I said, this is part of the Office 365 suite of apps. Again, this is just very simple, but you can get the idea here of where you could have a list of to-dos, in progress and done. This was us just trying this out really for event planning, so planning an event. So you can see contact all speakers, finalize agenda. We had those all listed on the left-hand side, and as we were working on them, we moved them across. So some really useful tools there to help you kind of see the bigger context of a project and break down into tasks. And then when you're collaborating with other people, you can all go to one place and you can allocate tasks and ask questions and update your progress. So if I'm working with other people, I don't have to email and say, where are you with this task? I can see on the board. So I definitely recommend you have a look at some of those, one of those options, depending on if you're using Office 365. I would suggest starting with Planner. Just having a look at the time. Okay, so we've got some, again, some other tools that can help productivity within teams. So kind of moving on from those project management tools. So some tools that can help better communication and collaboration. And I think a lot of these have come into their own over the recent months. This purple icon here is Teams. We're running, if you're using Office 365 and want to find out more about Teams, we are running Introduction to Teams sessions. So that might be something that be good for you to go on. But there are other similar tools. So Slack, some of you might have heard about that. I've got a screenshot to talk through in a moment. If you're a Google user, I mean, you've got the chat functionality there as well. And again, in terms of communication, I think Slack's mantra is no more email. So it's kind of looking at another way and kind of taking some conversations off email and enabling you to have a much kind of quicker, more efficient communication without wasting time backwards and forwards with long emails. So Teams, I mean, as I said, we've got a whole hour-long introduction to Teams session, but just to just going to raise awareness of a couple of the features. One is that you can create multiple teams, and within a team, you can create what's called different channels, but you can split work up into different areas that might involve different people. You can then use Teams to chat. So this is just a screenshot of a chat thread, and I mean, Sorrel can test to this. A lot of our internal communications now across the team all happens in Teams, not in email, or that's how we try to have it. And it just means you can have a kind of very quick backwards and forwards conversation. There are icons. I can just click my thumb up that I've read what Sorrel sent me. So it's just a really good quick way to communicate and collaborate, and you can do that as on a group level, or you can have private chats with just between two people. Also in Teams, you've got a space for files. So that's the other thing around collaboration. Somebody's talked about track changes. It means that you can bring files into this one place and collaborate with other people there. So you're not sending attachments and getting confused about different versions. You can both be working on the same document and having a conversation down the side, and you can be doing the editing, which gets marked up just like track changes did in the older versions of, or in the standalone Word application. So that's Teams. This is Slack. So very similar. I'm in a number of Slack groups, and that's mainly where I'm collaborating with external people on, or I've been invited in because I'm working on a project. So again, quite similar. You've got a kind of chat, you're having communications within Slack rather than email. You can upload documents. So if you're not using Office 365, Slack might be something to have a look at. Again, there's a mobile app, so you can download that onto your phone, and you would get alerts if somebody's mentioned you in the thread and they need you to get back on something. Okay. We're going to have a quick look at event administration, and Sorrel's going to.
Yeah, this one obviously came up in the word cloud as well. Lots of people are using event administration sites. They are really useful. We personally use Eventbrite, but there are others. So BookitBee might be one you want to look at, or TicketTailor. Effectively, what you want to be assessing it for is and what they're useful for is taking those bookings, so gathering the data that you need from the individual. In Eventbrite, for example, you can also take custom questions. You can create those in your order form. So when people fill that in, you've got some specific data. Yeah, you could move on.
Actually, I'll just go through, yeah.
So yeah, custom questions for booking. So yeah, that's great, because you probably already found when you booked on our sessions, you've given us some brilliant data that we can use for reporting back to our funder, and also understanding what kind of needs are and what size of groups are, and to know that we're hitting our target, which is smaller organisations across London. So that's really great. The automated reminder. So we sometimes set new ones up, but it's there already for you. So people are getting the reminder that there are events coming up, which is great. Wait list management. So you've got a really popular session and there's a waiting list. You can then let tickets go to the next person on the list, which is great, because you've got a hot list of people that are really interested in your session, which you wouldn't know about. People might be emailing you otherwise. Reporting. So you get lots of event reports, how well did it do, how many people booked, all kinds of reports that you can customize and download. Taking payments. So yeah, payment taking's obviously a key one. You want to make sure that you're getting the money in if you are charging for your session, and that's all kind of done for you. Something to think about is integrations with other platforms. We'll come on to integrations a bit later, but there is stuff that kind of works with other platforms, which can be really useful. Things like Zoom integration. And then Eventbrite Organizer app. So today I was checking in people as the app was kind of going on my. So I've got another device at the moment whilst Kate's been talking, and I've been checking you all in. So that's been really useful for me. And obviously there's DIY marketing. So people will find you on Eventbrite for what you're offering without you having to even go out and market. So we do pick up quite a few organizations book on just via Eventbrite. And obviously we know that because Eventbrite will give you all of your analytics that you need to be able to understand where people are coming from. So it's a kind of all-in-one system that can help you do an awful lot. But we'll talk about where there might be differences later with integrations.
Thanks, Sorrel. Going to move on. There's a bit of a link there in terms of data collection. We kind of use Eventbrite to its full potential and collect data from people at that point of booking. But there are lots of online form options, and a lot of our work with smaller groups, in this kind of productivity area, is moving from paper to digital, and this is a really good first step. At an kind of entry level, we've got Google Forms is that purple icon, and then the green one here is the Office 365 form. They're very similar, so it will depend on which of these you're using, but you can set up you can use these forms for surveys, but what we want you to think about is how you can kind of build in using forms for better data collection that's linked to kind of processes, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. SurveyMonkey, you've probably heard of that. It's got some more sophisticated, if you're doing bigger surveys and you want to do lots of analysis, there's some more functionality there over and above what Google and Forms can offer you. Quick Tap Survey, I've added that to the slide because it's an example of an offline survey tool, and our example, which fits quite nicely within this session. The reason we discovered this was doing some research for a young carers organisation that took the young carers on trips. On their way home on the minibus, they used to hand out paper surveys for them to write and kind of share back what they got out of the trip. what it kind of meant for them, but they discovered that it was the young carers didn't spend much time on it, and also it meant that somebody else had to collect in those forms, decipher their handwriting and type up that feedback somewhere. So quick tap survey, they could use that on tablets, pass the tablets around, but it meant they could complete it as they were traveling back from the trip. And it meant that it didn't matter if their internet connection went, it would save those responses and then sync once they were back on Wi-Fi, back in the office, for example. Mentimeter is another, it's slightly different. It's a bit fun. We use this tool quite a lot for data capture within sessions. We did it within our face-to-face sessions as well, and it really kind of took over from handing out lots of post-it notes in some of the training that we ran, which again was time consuming for us to then type up and analyze afterwards. We can use Mentimeter instead, and we've got that data digitally. I'm going to just use this as an example. We're going to come on to processes at the end, but I thought it fits quite nicely here in terms of thinking a bit differently about those online forms. Somebody in this session might recognize this scenario, but it came up last week, and it's just quite a good example of how we find that if we don't take a step back and think, how could this work better, you kind of fall into patterns. So this was a project where volunteers make phone calls to clients as part of a befriending scheme. The volunteers have to then email summaries of the conversation to a volunteer supervisor who's a volunteer themselves. And then that volunteer supervisor sifts through all these emails that are coming in all at different times, and then kind of manually enters this information into Excel. And then that Excel is emailed kind of at, I think, probably weekly or basis to the staff member at that organisation. And then the staff member uses that information for monitoring, but also checking safeguarding, if there is any safeguarding issues. So, you can see how that's happened. But when we were talking this through, there's another way where you could use forms, which would really make this whole process much more, not just efficient, but much, a much better outcome. So instead, you could flip this around, and the volunteers that are making the phone calls could be sent a link to a form that they regularly complete. So after each phone call, they're just clicking on the link and quickly answering a few questions. And you could structure that so it's not just, you're actually asking specific questions. All of those responses then come back into one spreadsheet. So all the supervisor is needing to do is keep an eye on that spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet can then be shared with the staff members, so everybody's looking in the one place. And it just cuts out quite a lot of time that obviously that volunteer supervisor could spend supporting the volunteers rather than kind of doing that manual admin. So it's just kind of rethinking and not just thinking about online forms for more formal survey data collection, but how you could build that in to make a process more efficient and effective, really. Okay, we touched on integration. Sora's just going to give you some examples.
Yeah, so it's always worth looking out for integrations in tools, but then at the same time, we need to assess their practical application and whether it really works. So for example, MailChimp and SurveyMonkey have an integration. So you could log into your SurveyMonkey account, and if your accounts are integrated, you could send straight out your survey to your MailChimp audience. So that would be great if, of course, everybody that you need to send that survey to is in MailChimp. So it just means you'd end up with an extra. If they weren't there, if it was a half and half situation, for example, you'd still need to send the link out to others. Of course, it would all be coming back to the same place, but it's not as easy an integration as you might think. So yes, if everybody's in MailChimp, it's great, but if they're not, you've got multiple systems in play. You might also integrate Zoom with Eventbrite, for example. So Zoom and Eventbrite, they work together now. You could create your event on Eventbrite, make it an online event, and upload and put your Zoom link there, so everything's in one place, which is great. You think, oh, fabulous, everybody's logging into the same place, but they have to log in. So if you've got an event and you've managed it that way, in order to access those links, people would have to log into their Eventbrite account that they booked with in order to then access all the rest of the event materials, including the Zoom link. We've tried that in the past, and lots of people don't look for their Eventbrite email, or it might be that the email that comes out ends up in junk, and then you've got a whole bunch of people going, actually, where's my link? I need to get in here. So there are integrations that can work and can save time, but you need to assess where they're most useful to you.
I just had a quick thought on our Mentimeter. I don't think anybody said Zoom, did they?
No, nobody's thinking it's the most productive tool in the world, but I guess there are other integrations. We've just we put those up as ones that, yes, they're there, but they're probably not to do. There are others, so things like integrations with calendars. There's other kinds of integrations that might help be more productive. MailChimp can integrate with lots of databases as well, but again, you'd have to think, well, if we've got a database and somebody unsubscribes from MailChimp for our marketing, does that relate to our database? Is there a proper link made there? Or does it mean we're still having to manually do that? Or do we want to manually do that? Because actually, just because they've taken themselves off our MailChimp list doesn't mean that we don't want to communicate with them at all, or they don't want communications from us. So sometimes it's working out what's your integrated process before you then go and see whether the tools will do it. So really think around what you need to do.
And I think from our experience, there's something about losing a bit of personalization and thinking about your audience, whether somebody trusts, whether there's, trusts an automated email from Eventbrite versus one from, the person that they know at that organization. Brilliant. And the good thing with these integrations is that all the hard work's done for you. Somebody's done the coding that links the two. All you're just saying is enable the link between those two tools. There are other tools. So we're kind of moving on a little bit more advanced here, but if you kind of get that you could join up processes and it would be so much more efficient, but it's a bit more complicated than just the options that are available for you where those integrations exist. You can use, I've called them third-party connectors. So there are a couple of tools that you could have a look at, Zapier and IFTT, which is if this then that. I think that's right. So basically you kind of build up a bit of that they're tools that enable you to kind of build up a logic. So the example I'm showing you here is from the Zapier website. You can create an account, and then you can create, I think they call them zaps. I get confused with recipes and zaps. I think it's a zap. So here's an example. The logic is that when I get a new email in Gmail, that's the trigger for what the process that you want to automate. The action is copy the attachment from Gmail to Dropbox. And then there's a third action, alert me in Slack about the new Dropbox file. So it might be that you're spending your day in Slack. That's where you're doing most of your work. But as and when an email comes into your Gmail account, automatically that attachment. So it might be that you've asked people to send you, that could be application forms for a job, for example. All of those attachments automatically get put into a folder, in this case in Dropbox, and you get an alert that there's been a new application come in. So you can build your own. So I just wanted to kind of raise awareness that functionality is there, and the way these tools work is that it's a very kind of clean user interface. You don't need to know anything about coding. You just need to choose what tools you're linking and kind of think through the logic of when this happens. So that's the trigger. You want then this to happen next. And there's lots of guidance on those websites in terms of how to do that. And there's lots of commonly used processes. So it might be that that's already there, or it might be that you customize it. For people that are using Office 365, there's an app called Power Automate. So this is where you can create workflows between Office 365 apps. So it might be very similar to the one I've just showed you with Zapier. You've got an automated flow, so that it's triggered by something happening, or you might want to trigger something manually. So there's a range of different options here. If I just move on to the next slide. And I recognize not everybody's at this point, but it's really just to show that what's possible without knowing anything about coding. You can kind of automate a sequence of processes. And this is what it looks like in terms of setting those up. So if I wanted to create a Power Automate, it's asking me to choose my trigger. So it's got, it's got them there for you. You can choose one. So here's a good one: when a new response is submitted to a Microsoft form, that might be the starting point, and then you'll go on to select what you want that to trigger. So that could be an alert to a certain person. When a task is assigned to me in Planner, there's another one. So you can kind of choose your starting point, and it guides you through what to do next to kind of build those up. So we've started having a play with this, and there's a couple of organizations we know that are quite interested in kind of building some automated processes. So do let us know if you'd like some support around that, whether that's in Power Automate or exploring use of tools like Zapier. Okay, we've whizzed through quite a lot of tools. Here's a slide where you can go and find, go and look for some more. There's the service recipes there, so you can kind of, that's where it's quite nice to kind of read through another organisation's journey. They had a particular challenge, and then they've implemented a tool, so you can kind of get some learning, but there are a number of other links there you can have a look at. Some of you might know that we've always released our favourite app sheet. So what we're going to be doing is putting together another one linked to this productivity session. So we will share that with you. Just looking at time, we wanted to build in a break, partly to make the point that being productive doesn't mean that we should be working non-stop for 8 hours in a stretch. It's important to look after ourselves and take breaks, and there are some nice tools that can enforce those. And so this is a tool that one of our colleagues used to use in the office. It's called iCoach, but you can set it so that every hour, or you can set the time period yourself, that this flashes up on the screen and stops you doing anything. And it's about taking your eyes off the screen, looking out of the window, doing some stretches, and it kind of forces you to, I think, you can set the time. 9 always used to have 3-minute breaks.